China is accusing Australia of attempting to stoke domestic nationalism in a row over Australia's response to a tweet from the Chinese government. An official shared this doctored image. We've blurred some of it, but it shows a man in an Australian military uniform holding a knife to an Afghan child's neck. The image is fake, but the Chinese goal, which has been achieved, was to highlight a damning report last month into alleged Australian war crimes in Afghanistan. And Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison may want an apology for the tweet, but so far he hasn't got one. Instead, here's a statement from the Chinese embassy in Australia saying it's our advice that the Australian side face up to the crimes committed by Australian soldiers in Afghanistan, hold those perpetrators accountable and bring justice to the victims. Right, but Australia has already appointed a special investigator to gather evidence which could lead to criminal charges, and the head of the Australian military has issued an apology. He did so when the report came out. Here's some of it.
These findings allege the most serious breaches of military conduct and professional values. Such alleged behaviour profoundly disrespected the trust placed in us by the Afghan people.
None of that stopping a range of Chinese state media Twitter accounts. Here's Stephen Jetchek from ABC News Australia highlighting this, saying, "I've lost count of the number of Chinese state media editorials lambasting Australia over the last 48 hours, and they're not flagging yet." Well, in a bid to counter those kind of messages, Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison posted on the Chinese social media platform WeChat, writing, "Australia's ability to deal with issues in a transparent and honest way is a strength of this country and one that recognises all those who serve it." While the artist who made the original doctored image has responded to Scott Morrison's outrage.
I feel sympathetic for him and fully understand Mr. Morrison's mood right now. But I would still advise Mr. Morrison to face reality and put his efforts into domestic affairs.
And the artist has now released this image showing Scott Morrison to the right of frame covering a dead body while pointing a finger at the Chinese cartoonist. And we see the press focusing on the cartoonist too. But that argument doesn't quite add up. The world's press covered the release of the report on Afghanistan in huge detail. Here's the New York Times with the headline, "Bloodlust and Demigods Behind an Australian Force's Slaughter of Helpless Afghans." CNN also went with a culture of bloodlust. It was also reported by the Indian Express and Germany's Deutsche Welle and many, many other outlets. Seen in isolation, this whole row appears to have escalated very quickly, but this is actually part of something far bigger. Through 2020, relations have worsened, not least because Australia called for an international inquiry into how COVID-19 began in China, and the Chinese have been imposing hefty tariffs on Australian exports, including wine. As the Chinese are well aware, that stings. China is the biggest destination for Australian wine. And while the state of the Australian wine industry may not seem like a matter of major international importance, this is all about the power balance between China and the West. For some, it's a cause of concern. A group of 200 MPs from 19 countries have launched a campaign to convince people to buy Australian wine in December as an act of solidarity. Here's a clip of a video that it's released.
Cheers, and also say no bullying from China.
Ah, that's a fine Australian wine.
The group also says, when China threatens Australia, it threatens us all. And as my colleague Nick Bryant puts it, if you want an illustration of how the global balance of power has shifted in 2020 while the US has been in a state of such dysfunction, look at how China is flexing its muscles with Australia. And if this is about the West as much as about China, then so far President Trump has said nothing about this row. For Joe Biden, how to handle a more assertive Chinese foreign policy is one of the many decisions that awaits him.